And welcome back to Prop by the Bar. Been a little while since we've tuned in. I think we've delayed this episode just to get the, well, there's been lots happening. Federal election, rate cut, tariffs.
Let's be honest, we were too scared to have any predictions of anything when there was a federal election to be had. There was an RBA announcement to be had. There's just, there's Ukraine wars that are finishing and other wars that are starting. So
new Pope.
We just thought we'd new Pope. We thought, thanks,
just
John.
had to get the coronation out of the way and...
yeah, we just had to. So there's a few things we had to get out of the way. And you being a good Catholic boy, be happy with the new Pope. Mike?
An American for the first time.
Yeah.
There we go. You would have
Pope
thought.
Leo, is that right?
Pope Leo.
Pope Leo, not a bad gig. Yeah, so there's been a lot going on.
Yep.
A hell of a lot going on.
Federal election.
Federal election. But the good thing, let's bring it back to property. All property markets sort of were on hold and waiting to see what would happen.
Yeah.
We had stagnant growth auctions that just passed in that should have sold. People were standing at the auctions wanting to buy that just wouldn't have the confidence to buy.
Yeah, it's funny how
what
primarily is going to change, really, that's going to stop people, but that is the mentality. And particularly in the commercial market, if you ask when's a good or bad time to sell, generally you avoid school holidays and elections.
Yeah.
So, we did see a dip in inquiry.
I did think it was interesting. There was quite a lot of good property that sort of hit the market. Then they announced the federal election and they all just sort of went on hold a little bit. Yeah. And a lot of them went to private sale quickly instead of auctions and stuff like that. And some of those good properties are still on the market, but a lot of them have started to transact, in the last couple of days since the election.
Look, we found when there was a rate cut in February that actually March was very, very healthy in terms of commercial.
Yeah.
Commercial had been pretty soft.
Yep.
Then again, we went to that period of, the federal election was called, so things slowed. Now we've had another rate cut announced yesterday. I would expect a trickling of confidence to come back again. And
so one thing I've noticed just in the commercial stuff is an increase in investors coming back into it as well, and people.
The yield's starting to balance out.
And it's funny now we can sort of we've had that yield go up as the RBA went up, and as we come down, we can almost retrace what happened to work out where our yield should be as we fall back down the scale again.
Well, we haven't had this rate for 2 years now, so.
No. So last time we were at 3.85%. Your average commercial yield along, say, Pakenham Street for a retail shop was around 5%.
Yeah.
And your average office rent was still sitting at 6.5%. And as we go back down again, you'd expect those
to come back
half a percent, quarter of a percent. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to watch that as they react back the other way.
Well, I think that disparity between the pricing between where investors and sellers are starting to even out a little bit now. Yeah. So we had a big move in that 2 years with 12 or 13 interest rate rises. So
we had that switch from investors leaving the market and owner occupiers really coming to their strength and buying, being able to, and having the buying power as owner occupiers. And that's, I think we'll start to see the investors come back over the top and win some of those auctions again.
State government budget just released as well.
Yes.
Had a lot happened in this last couple of weeks.
There's a lot going on. I don't know if you've read the whole thing. I haven't. But I've scanned through it, listed enough of it. It's just, I don't know, it's how do you paint a bad picture, a different way. But I didn't, a lot of debt. Debt. We've got 192 billion worth of debt to cover or something. And I think someone said the other day that, you could $36 billion worth of repayments in 1 year to pay down debt. I don't know if that statistic's right, but that's what I heard the other day. So, there's the amount of money we're going to be paying off this debt. That's the scary part of that budget for me.
So what happens when these big builds are finished?
Well, I think, here's my conspiracy theory, right? I think this government is scared of the big builds finishing. And that's why we keep seeing them extended, and while we see more ones coming online. I think they're terrified. When the big builds finish, what happens to the hundreds of thousands of workers that are on the big build? Where do they go? And I think that's the big problem, because the moment they finish some of these builds, these people come back in the community. I'm sorry, but the businesses they destroyed when they went in there and the high wages aren't there anymore. Right.
So what happens there? We're seeing a lot of private enterprise developments don't stack because of wages and those things. Yep. So we're going to see a softening of wages come back in that construction.
It has to be a softening of wages, which is going to be interesting on the economy, because I think Victoria's going the opposite direction of every other state, and we're going to see we have to see a softening of wages. But the thing is, good businesses that supported all those wages are now gone. Like it just saw in the paper the other day, Peter Stevenson's going into
another 400
liquidation.
jobs.
Yeah. That's a business that's been around for 70 years and it's gone. 400 jobs. There's businesses after businesses going into liquidation at the moment. So where these people come back to, wages have to come back down. People are going to have these people are going to have to be willing to realise they're no longer on a government wage and they're going to have to readjust their lifestyles, and we're going to see an impact on the higher end of that property market because it very much that rural lifestyle market has been buoyed by these high-waged people buying up big houses in these rural areas, spending a lot of money on boats and caravans and that sort of thing. And we saw there for a period of time where caravan sales were through the roof, and there was more people. There was a period there where there was more people working in the caravan construction industry in Australia than there was at the height of the car industry. And that just goes to how much disposable income was available through these projects that's no longer going to be around. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting when these builds finish. And I think, if I was a Liberal government coming in, perhaps looking like we might win in November, you'd be bloody terrified to take on that responsibility, wouldn't you, of having to finish the big builds, because then they'll be to blame.
There's a lot of water to go under the bridge.
There's a lot happening. There's a lot happening.
So let's bring it back to property in Geelong.
Yeah.
What we're generally here for. What are you seeing in the market?
The market has begun to improve nearly across every sector, which is fantastic. I think I just mentioned that I've seen more sales and transactions in commercial in the last few weeks than I've seen in almost 12 months. So it's been really good. And it's interesting that we did see, you would have seen this, that a lot of the real estate agents that were there at the peaks, that would, nearly anybody could sell anything. Most of them, it's had a clean out effect. And the ones that are now putting the sales through are the ones that have been around a long time, who have got that knowledge, and they're negotiating and they're getting transactions to the door. They know who to call to get the job done. So we're starting to see transactions happening. We're starting to see the good agents sell. And I think that's good. And I think we're starting to see stock at the higher end come on the market too, the above $2.5 million stock.
That had been sort of stagnant for a long time, that higher end.
We went for 12 months without having a sale of a property above 2.5 million, even listed, and in the Geelong urban area. And now we've got about 7 of them. Yep. So we've got some stock of good quality property, and the good quality property leads the market. Right? When in a downturn, you see them coming off the market and not particularly willing to sell. And when the market's coming back up, they're the first ones that come on to make the most of that demand.
Yeah, and across the commercial sector, I think probably the office and industrial being the two that have really laid stagnant. But we're starting to see a little bit of movement in those areas as well.
Office space is still in a bit of a hard spot. The office space that's strata is very different. We discussed that with Phil at the last episode, that there just isn't still any strata around. The only strata stuff's that stuff that was in our last episode.
Well, there's only 5 of those left now. 15 of the 20 have now sold. Yeah,
there you go. And so they can see the success of that development. And any other office that's sold in the last little while has been small strata offices for small local businesses that are established, that are buying them. In the retail sector, town's still struggling with Market Square and everything else. Talking to the hospitality guys, they're struggling.
Have you got an update on Market Square for us?
Yeah, we met with Jacinta Allen. So 3 weeks ago now, we sat down with Jacinta Allen, myself, Michael Johnson from the Committee for Geelong, and Simon Loader. And I cannot tell people how much they need to get back behind the Committee for Geelong, because Michael Johnson is doing a fantastic job. A lot of people might have underrated him when he took on that job, taking that advocacy group, which is the Committee for Geelong, forward. But he's done such a great job. His connections to be able to get meetings like that with Jacinta Allen and be able to get other people in the room, Ella George, Christine Cousins, to be able to understand the policies to guide that conversation as well as he did. He deserves hats off. If you weren't on the bandwagon of Community for Geelong, consider getting back on, because he's bloody good and he's doing something for this town that I don't think even the council's doing, which is pushing these big agendas forward. And he's not afraid to ask. He's the main driving force, or the Community for Geelong at the moment, for the Avalon funding and to push the Avalon agenda, and they have been able to convince the government to include Geelong in one of their growth areas in their strategy, in the Victorian planning strategy. So they've had some big wins recently, the Committee for Geelong, through that advocacy. Market Square, we got a sit down with Jacinta. She listened to it for an hour and a half. She was engaging. She was all over it. She was actually really, she gets beaten up in the press, but to be one-on-one with her in a small room, she was a very impressive individual. And I think, a highlight of my career to sit down with the Premier and talk about what Geelong needs. But it was good. I hope she does something with it now. There's not much more we can do. We've advocated, we've got it right to the Premier's office. The Premier knows exactly what we need, and I think she believed in what we presented to her. So we hope that works. Yeah, that's where we're at with that.
Gareth, Agrival, you're involved in a lot of that sector. What's happening out there? I know severe drought at the moment.
Yeah, there is. I'm involved in a valuation business called Agrival, which covers all of Australia and does an internal process for banks. So we get to see quite a wide variety of statistics and information coming back from the farms. And right now, Western Victoria is in the worst drought since about 63, I think someone said, which is it's quite incredible to...
Hasn't got enough noise, really, has it?
Well,
it's starting to, but...
What really annoys me is the government still doesn't come out and call it a drought. And the moment they do, we're going to get drought funding, we're going to get drought relief and all that sort of stuff kick in. But the government still is hanging back on calling it a drought. They're calling it different things, but it's a proper drought. We're in one of the worst droughts.
I think our water storages are lower than they were at the turn of the millennium. When we had severe restrictions, and that's all you heard
and we've turned, and you might not realise, but for the first time ever, we've turned on the desal plant.
So
the desal plant's actually
ordering water,
producing water out of the ocean. But out in the country, it's our team are driving around, going to these people's houses and talking to these people. There is so many people out there that are actually living below the poverty line at the moment out in Western Victoria. It's dire. If you have a look at these farms, they've gone through a period where they've had the commodity prices for their lambs and protein and beef like that, those sort of things where they make their money have been really hit. There was a time there where in Ballarat you were selling a full-grown wether for $1, So, you can't grow them for less than about $100 a head. So to be getting only $1 for them at the market is terrible. And that was driven by the supermarkets who dominate the abattoirs, who then push back on the market pricing and mucked around the market pricing and really hurt farmers there. We've had issues with oversupply of beef from the US and other things like that, tariffs on the beef. It's pushed beef prices down, and now they're sort of to recover, and beef prices are recovering now. But so you've also had an end of the exporting of live export, and live export was a way for a lot of farmers to have some secondary income or some relief income coming in times of tough. They could put their stock on a truck and sell it as live export and get money for it. That's been cut off. And it's not like our buyers that were buying live export, they're still getting live export. They're just not getting it from us anymore. Because their religion requires that they eat their meat, that they butcher it themselves, that they buy it live and butcher it themselves. So unfortunately, they're buying their stock from other places and we're just missing out. So our farmers have had their income hit. They've had increased inputs from gas prices and diesel prices going through the roof. And we had a green drought. The green drought was a sort of a semi-drought, and then we've gone into a full-on hard drought. And so the water in the soil is just as low. It's just not there. There's no moisture in the soil. The soil moisture levels are as low as they've ever been. Trying to grow anything from crops right through is really fraught. And anybody who is growing a crop at the moment is keeping an eye on farmers' feed for their livestock. And to give you an understanding, my family feed out about 50 tonnes of grain every month to our feed, to our stock. Right, once a month we're spending 50 tonnes of grain to keep our stock alive. If you go out to the Hamilton Highway and out to some of the roads, you'll see that there's truck after truck headed north full of cattle and full of sheep, because we can't sustain those stocks on the land. Our farmers are selling these stocks at the bottom end, at the lower price, because they're malnourished and they're skinnier, and it's the wrong time to be selling, but they have to sell them to get them off farm. So again, they're losing income. So they've been hit with income. They've been hit with their input costs. There's nothing left to give, and now they're hit with a fire levy. So it's just, I just can't tell you how bad it is out there. In terms of land prices, the land prices for agriculture were driven by farmer buying farmer. That's now changed because the farmers can't afford it, so they're pulling right back. So our land prices for agriculture has pulled back by about 30% from the peaks of 2022, which would be one of the biggest shifts of any property market or any market sector to be reduced by that much. They might have had 30, 40% growth, but we're back to 2019 values in the bush.
Yeah, right.
So it is really tough out there, really tough. Hats off to the farmers. This, like anything, it will come around, swings and roundabouts. They'll get back on their feet. They're proud people. But there is some farmers out there that are doing new things to create new opportunities. And one of the great things that we're fortunate to have in this region is lots of poultry farmers, egg farmers, and there's a couple of cases now where these businesses are starting to grow into big manufacturing facilities. There's a group of guys that have bought up the Happy Hens and Terrain farms, and they're now producing over 700,000 eggs a day out at North Geelong, where they sort them in a sorting facility, and they've set up their business so that when they get the bird flu, it only affects one farm, not others, and so they've been very dynamic. And those sort of industries are being dynamic and are responding to this, and we're starting to see a change of industries in certain sectors and certain ways of using the land differently. So I think, although the farm or the agriculture industry is suffering, there is always green shoots of things that are happening that are creating some opportunities for the future.
Absolutely, well said. So let's get on to the rest of this episode. We've got two great guests. We've got our returning financial expert, David Flood, talk all things financial.
He does. He loves the word bond.
Bond. And we've got Megan Rovers, who is the Director of Property Hub, to come in and talk to us. We're pretty intrigued in what's happening in our growth corridor. So
it really does signal where the market's going, doesn't it? The growth corridors. So Megan being right at the coal face of that, I'm really looking forward to what she's got to say.
So two interviews coming up right now. With so much happening in the financial market at the moment, our first guest, he's back. Our resident financial guru, David Flood from MCP Financial Services, is here to talk to us all things finance and elections and
there's a lot to get through.
Cuts and lots of stuff happening.
Lots of happening.
Welcome back, mate.
Thank you. I wasn't surprised. I was surprised I got an invite back, given the last time I was here.
I think you still owe us dinner. Is that right?
I think that's correct. So when I got the call to say, "Would you come back?" I was somewhat surprised. I thought I was done. But yeah, look, there's been a lot happening over the last 3 to 4 months. I think everyone welcomed the rate cut yesterday.
Absolutely.
You know, on average, for a person who's got a $700,000 home loan, that's the best part of $100 a month.
It's got interesting with the predictions of everybody coming out saying it's going to be 0.5, it's going to be 0.25, it's going to be 4 in a row. I mean, NAB went the hardest, didn't they?
Yeah, so NAB said 50 points, and they're expecting another 50 between now and August.
Maybe they should drop their rates by 50 points.
But
it was talked about. Yeah. If you look at the notes,
correct.
They have talked about 0.5%.
Yeah, I think that was the big thing to come out. So I can't remember a time where you've had such a range of forecasts. You had some economists saying there'll be nothing, some 25, some 50. I just can't remember a time where it was so divergent. But as you rightly pointed out, what came out of her speech yesterday was they did discuss 50 points, which I think's interesting in itself, because they do see some concerns. Her tone was very dovish for the first hole. February was a little bit, but more so this time. Look, they talked about moving to a neutral rate setting now, so that need for restrictive is starting to go. They're still mindful of employment still being relatively strong. There was a real wage increase, so they are worried about that. But I think the global uncertainty.
The employment mention of that was interesting, given that the state budget came out that evening and showed that the government's going to axe 1,200 jobs across the public sector. So I think there is some hurt to come in that wage figure and the wage numbers. I think also if we get to the end of some of these builds and things like that, the big builds,
yes,
you know, Victoria's in for a big hurt if all those people
probably
come.
not a lot of infrastructure to be had after that.
No.
Yeah.
Well, we're broke. What else can we build?
Yeah. And I think the other thing that came through was consumption was soft. So consumer consumption was a bit softer than expected.
Yeah, I thought the market was a bit more stagnant.
Than they would have liked. So I think, that played a part. And then I think it's just the great geopolitical uncertainty out there at the moment. So for the first time, they're running 3 forecasts at the moment. So they're running a forecast, which at the moment, their main one, which says there's a moderate decline in global GDP, unemployment increases and consumption comes off a little bit, and inflation gets within the lower end of the 2% range. But they then have a forecast which says we have a trade war, which means China and America don't come to an agreement. And if that's the case, it's a bit of an Armageddon. So rates come back. We need to get to
And I suppose the good thing about them having a conservative approach to dropping the rates is that we've got somewhere to go.
Correct.
Right. So if these trade wars do happen,
Yep.
we've got something in the tank to drop fast.
Correct.
And to correct whatever damage that could be.
Yep.
But at the same time, I sometimes feel like Victoria needs its own RBA, because I think all the statistics show that in Victoria we're hurting more than anywhere else. We've got more delinquencies, high debt. We've got less confidence out there. It's Victoria seems on every mechanism of measurement we're getting smacked in Victoria.
Well, in our field too, with that budget that come out, 47% of all state taxes are derived from property, whether that's stamp duty or land tax or whatnot.
They're predicting that to go up by 5%.
Yeah.
Yet we know that we've got decreasing population
Yes,
growth.
yeah. So
in
population
Victoria.
growth will drop from 2.4 to 1.7.
Yep, that's right. So we're dropping, which means that we're not going to get as many houses sold. We're not going to get as many stamp duty coming through as they predict. So I don't know how they've predicted that growth in taxes from property. Property's got no more to give.
Yeah.
There's none. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing it when you compare us to the rest of the states too. When you look at consumption numbers, if you look at house build numbers, etc., we're lagging.
Oh yeah,
we're lagging.
Well, I think our land tax threshold's 50,000. I think the next closest anywhere in Australia is 650,000.
Yeah.
So I don't know too many properties that are worth less than 50,000.
No, not at all. Drop the threshold. The question, Dave, is how much is the RBA focusing on what's happening in the US? So you've got the US bond rates and some of the stuff going on in the US. Talk us through how the bond rate has such a great relationship to
So I think so. It's a question we get asked all the time, right? So how does the world geopolitical? How does trade tariffs? So we're not just talking about US, but just tariffs in general. Or how does that all sort of interact? And I think the key to bring it back is bonds. So you start with bonds. So bonds are like the gold of...
To where you go when times are trouble.
Yeah.
You
bonds...
You basically lend the money to the government.
Yeah,
right?
So if you said US bonds are the gold star, right?
Yeah.
If you want a really safe investment, you would go to a US bond, right? That's as safe as it gets. So what's a bond? It's effectively a loan. So it's effectively the US government saying, you lend me $1,000, right? I will pay you 5% on that, right, at issuance. So that's, you get $50 every year for 10 years,
and they're
right?
fixed.
They're fixed, they don't
really
move. And then at the end of that 10 years, you get your $1,000 back, right? So that's a bond. So that's been really safe. You get your money back and you get a return. So bonds work that if bond prices go up, so if they're initially issued at $1,000, but people want more of those bonds and they get to $1,100, then obviously your yield comes off because they're fixed. Conversely, if there's a softening in the bond market, what you see is your yields go up, so your return comes better, but the bond price comes off. Now because that's seen as the safest sort of investment, that's really what drives, especially fixed rates, so interest rates, how others lend to each other is really driven off that bond price.
They use that as a barometer.
Correct.
How things are going.
So if this is seen as the gold star of investment and I get a good return, if I then want to borrow money, I'm going to have to pay a bit more to get an investor to come into me, right? So if yields are coming off, then interest rates come off.
Come down,
etc. If yields are increasing, then interest rates get higher, etc.
Typically, when the bond market's strong, it indicates the R word.
There's a recession on the way. Well, and if you look at the US, so the US has moved at the start of the year from 100 basis point cut to no cuts, and now there's real concern that if the tariffs do come in, it could actually lead to inflation issues and having to raise rates. Now that's like really extreme, so I don't want anyone listening to it, but that's what they're dealing with now. Is that's a real possibility.
So back domestically, we're talking rate cuts, which typically will start seeing an upshift in pricing. So you've got that inflationary matter. I saw in the RBA note.
Well, not necessarily. If it's going to depend on the consumer confidence, right? And I think this rate cut, a lot of people are going to just bank it. I don't think you're going to see a huge uptick in spending.
No, I don't think it's in spending, but I think it's more of a confidence driver for those that want to buy property. This is the second one. We haven't had two cuts for for I don't know how many years now.
I think more importantly,
or this rate we haven't had for 2 years.
Well, I think more importantly, it opens up the banks to be able to lend a bit more, right? Because they're all tied to serviceability. And this just improves serviceability.
Yeah, but my point was, I think she's really hit back at the government to saying the main problem is supply and demand.
Yeah.
And you've promised all these houses and you haven't delivered upon them.
Not built anything. Yeah. And in Victoria, it's hard because apartment. We keep talking about building apartments and building for affordable housing, and affordable housing apartments, they don't stack up. They don't make any feasible sense in Victoria because of construction costs. And then our greenfield estates, because they're being taxed so hard, they're not able to produce land out there that's in the affordable bracket anymore. So we're stuck in this place. We're actually got a downturn in the sales of lots in the greenfield estates, which we'll talk to our next guest about a bit more. And we've got we're not able to put house and land packages together that fall under that $750,000 threshold. So we're not building any affordable property even in the private sector.
So
federal election result.
Yeah, I was just going to get another free lunch here. just so Gareth and I can look forward to another free lunch.
Yeah.
Or we might have to,
Let's
double or nothing.
He's already paying lunch, so let's do the wine.
Let's do the wine.
Yeah.
The bottle of wine.
What do we think's in store for the rest of the year in terms of rates?
So I preface this one.
Too easy.
No, I preface this one.
Coming. How many cuts?
Yeah. Look, I think one. I think that gets us within the neutral zone. My personal view is the world needs each other as much as there's this view that one part of the world at the moment wants to deglobalise. I still think there's a need for us all to be connected and all of us to trade. So I think inevitably we will find a way through. Will it have some pain on the way through? Yes, but I don't think it'll be as bad as what people. I don't think you'll get this blow up the world thing. I just don't think it will happen. I think there's too much invested. I think we've definitely got one, possibly two. I go back to Michael's point before. I think really will be driven domestically by, do new houses come on? Is there a real demand and surge in property prices? Do we see that there? The reality is we're still underpinned.
Long-term targets, though, aren't they? They're not tomorrow fixes.
And we're still underpinned by government spending, right? So, if they continue to spend at the rate, I think it keeps it as is. Now, if you back that out, you could argue we need 1%, like Nab said, if you backed out government spending.
I'm going to throw something in there that I reckon makes it 2 or 3 even, right? The government, Chalmers, has come out and said he has to pull a pin on rebates.
Yep.
On electricity rebates and
so
gas rebates. So if you ask me, that's going to put a lot more pressure on the hip pocket. Spending's going to fall back. You're going to get confidence going to fall back.
But you could argue that creates an inflationary pressure because prices go up. So
prices go up.
Yeah, so people.
They artificially always go up.
Yeah. So.
But you get, like, if you take them out of that calc, I think the pressure is on the economy a lot harder.
We just saw petrol prices go up an average of 33 cents overnight.
Correct.
Yeah.
So there's some. So that's why I think it's definitely 1, maybe 2, and then it holds, right?
Yeah. I'm at 2.
Yeah,
nearest to pin.
Yeah.
What are you, Mike?
I'll say Switzerland on this one.
Soft. That's soft.
So we've just had a federal election.
Yes.
And, well, I think the result is not surprising, but I guess the size of the result was landslide victory to Labor. In terms of confidence and what that's going to do to the market, dust is just starting to settle on it.
Yeah, so I think it doesn't matter where your political allegiance lies. The one thing that the result gave us was a clear direction, a clear in power, right? So we know where they're going to go, and they've probably got 2 terms, which doesn't matter how you feel, it gives small business and people confidence, all right? So we know we're heading into it's stability, right? And if you look at the world and if you look at the markets, what's creating it? It's uncertainty. They're not sure where they're going to go, what happens next. We should feel fortunate that we've actually got a bit of confidence and stability now.
Unlike the Libs, they've just broken up with the Nationals.
Correct.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, the right party won. Because they obviously Labor was able to govern, is able to continue govern, and the way that Libs have fallen apart, you would think that they actually probably weren't ready to govern anyway. And I think we, at this particular time in our history, we need strong sense of where we're going,
So
strong confidence. So I think Labor's going to provide us that.
So that big win nationally, what's that sort of signify for us down Victoria coming into an election next year?
Well, what are the? I think the stats say that you end up.
Well,
that you get a change.
you do get a change. But
you're given what we've been through over the last 6 years and we haven't had a change.
Victoria had the lowest swing towards Albanese, still had a swing towards Albanese, but it had the lowest out of all the states. So, and I think with the fire levy and the demonstrations and the stuff that's going on, I think we still change government here, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, you've still got, you've had Moody's downgrade the Victorian government's credit rating, and I think the big thing to take out of it, they didn't.
Well, they haven't quite done it. They're about to do it. I think they're meeting tonight or tomorrow or something, and they're going to whack.
And the talk is, they're not downgrading it because they're worried about revenue and Victoria being able to generate revenue to pay its debt. They're worried that the government has no ability to manage fiscal policy and that they continue to spend. And that's on the fly.
One of the big things that was a bit disheartening in this budget is that they had a $3 billion windfall on GST and it was spent within 2 months. And it should have been a $5 billion deficit. It was reduced to $1 billion. So it's, anyway, we can go on about that budget.
Well, Floody, there's plenty of moving parts.
There is. I probably did nothing there and everyone's more confused, but anyway.
No, there's lots of great points and we look forward to seeing how many cuts.
2.
We'll round out the year.
2.
2?
You're going to 2? You come up to 2. You're
2.
soft. If you're at 1 or 2, then we could. Someone's going to buy the bottle of wine. Now Mike has to buy.
Yeah. As always, thanks for joining us.
No, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
We look forward to seeing what the market brings us.
Thanks.
Our next guest is Megan Rovers, who is the director, amongst other things, wear a few hats, but we're talking about Property Hub. So welcome to Prop, Megan, and thanks for joining.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Why don't you actually just explain a little bit about Property Hub and what you guys do?
Yeah, cool. So Geelong Property Hub is kind of the overarching company for a couple other companies that we have. So it's a shared services. So we have experts in accounts, marketing, admin, all in the one office. And then underneath that, we have separate businesses that all use those services to provide a really good service to the Geelong region when it comes to property. So we've got 2 real estate agencies, Armstrong Real Estate, which focuses on the Armstrong Creek growth corridor, and then Oslo Property, which is more demographic based, and it spreads across the entire Geelong region. So we have a finance company, a conveyancing company, and a building company alongside that as well.
Lots of balls to juggle.
There is, but it's always nice to kind of definitely move with the client through their experience.
Yeah.
So we think that no matter where a client is up to in their property journey, that we should be able to help them in one way or another.
Yeah, that's great.
Property Hub was your idea, wasn't it? Like you come up with this concept, you were the first out there and got it going. What was that journey like?
Yeah, so I was selling. I don't sell anymore. And when I was selling, I felt like for a client, there was kind of a lot of people in a transaction, and sometimes with that there was communication breakdowns, or we weren't necessarily all aligned. So I thought, instead of trying to fix that process entirely, why not bring everyone in-house and hopefully everyone can get along, which I think is the key when everyone is wearing different hats for the client. But I think it all comes down to communication. So we just try and make the client experience more streamlined for them by kind of keeping a lot of the, maybe politics to the side about the transaction. So, from a client's point of view, we hope it's a bit more of a streamlined process because it's already overwhelming for a lot of people.
It's a great initiative. And it's really, you've been out there, the leader of the real estate sort of industry out there for quite some time, and it's quite known well around the industry how much work you guys do out there, which is the reason why we wanted you to come along, because in my opinion, and Michael's as well, the budget that's come through and also the rate cut that's just happened, the market that's going to be most influenced by that is going to be that first home buyers, that affordability market, which is predominantly the Armstrong Creek clientele. Yeah. And so I'd love to hear from you about the journey that you've had over the last 18 to 2 years with the Armstrong Creek market, and then what you see, where you think this is going to go.
Yeah. It's been a journey, so you've got that right. It's been definitely a journey in the last 18 months to 2 years on what's happening in the market and the impacts that the rate cuts and the rate rises when they were having on people, from everyone from first home buyers to what they can actually get into the market for, right to our rental providers who had that portfolio of properties and might need to sell down, and what that does to medians and those types of things. as well. And I think with that, it's been a story of there's always been people that are needing to buy and sell. So for us as an agency, we hold about anywhere between 35 and 40% of the market share. So hopefully feel like we've got a pretty good sample size of what's going on. But our numbers haven't really changed throughout that market in terms of the volume that's coming through. It's just the need to sell has been slightly different to I want to upsize. So
that's interesting. So your listing numbers didn't really change, but your demand for who had control of the transactions changed.
Definitely, it was definitely it was an oversupply of buyers at one stage. Buyers kind of then had the power, and vendors were basically, hey, this is the only buy for your house. So a real change in supply and demand, and it happened really quickly. Yeah. And I think that is probably what caught a lot of people off guard, not just us as agents, but even homeowners off guard. Thinking, oh yeah, but that house only sold 4 months ago. Why can't I get that price anymore? Yeah. That's how quick the market was moving in a direction that maybe wasn't as favourable for the seller.
I've talked about this with Mike a fair bit. We talk about how in the good times anybody could sell, and it was pretty much everybody turning up, and every week there was a new real estate agency in Geelong, and now we've contracted, haven't we? We're back to a small number of agencies, and it's the agents that are able to negotiate and be there to change that dynamic, isn't it? That nearly we're winning the day now.
Yeah.
So we had a medium house price, I think at the peak of say $720, was it, or something like that, for Armstrong Creek, and that then got hit, and we dropped off. They got hit pretty hard, and it came all the way back to $650, which is a big drop for a lot of people losing that sort of. Did you see a bit of hurt?
Yeah, and I guess property is only worth what someone's willing to pay for it is one thing, but then it's all about the buying and selling timing. Because someone's property price coming back and they're not needing to sell is almost irrelevant to a certain degree. If it's peaked so much, that's great. You didn't actually get to do anything with that money. You didn't get the cash.
Or if you're buying and selling in the same market, it's all relative.
So you could actually upsize for a lot cheaper than you could a year ago. So it was all, and this is where I think, unfortunately, the news stories don't kind of educate people on this, and that's where we spent a lot of our appraisals in the last 18 months to 2 years actually explaining, well, it's actually a perfect time to upsize and potentially not downsize because you're going to get more bang for your buck in this market. So the median price is an interesting measure for me, because I think what we've seen...
Oh, I don't love it either, to be honest.
I think what we've seen is just a complete change in what is actually selling.
Yeah.
So the median price is always naturally going to come down, because for every rental that we were putting onto our book, one was going off just as quickly.
Yeah.
So we had a massive cash out of investors, and typically that investment stock sat around that 600 to 650. So then we had majority of that selling. So then that was
impacting your medium house price, because that was what was selling.
So it wasn't necessarily that someone's house was worth 750 and then it dropped to 650. It wasn't that drastic. It was the type of stock that was selling, the type of homes that were selling completely changed really quickly.
That's a really interesting point.
So then that's where these numbers, and that's where I think, again, the news story might be a little bit different to the reality of it.
Yeah.
It definitely
we've had about 19% of investors leave the state in the last 12 months. It's been insane.
It's been your compliance, 13 interest rate rises, and now your land tax bills, all in a short amount of time. So we've seen a huge shift in investor activity.
A lot of that stock was getting sold back as the affordable. I guess in your area, it would probably be easier to see it being sold back as affordable housing, or back to people with that below that 650 mark. It's a perfect first home house.
Absolutely. Like if you look at the average incomes of I guess the general job and the type of industry that we've got in Geelong, if you've got two incomes at that, then you can actually afford 650, but you may not be able to afford 750. So that's why I think our transactions didn't change in terms of numbers, just because it just was a completely different seller and a completely different buyer at that point in time. And because the rental market became really tough because we lost supply, so investors were cashing out, but then there was still a huge demand for people in the market to rent. So then rental prices went up. So then people started thinking, well, if I'm paying $550 a week in rent, can I then buy? So then there was these people that were kind of seesawing out of the rental market into a buyer. Yeah. And that's where us as an agency, we've been kind of looking at that, going, how can we support those people into the market?
Yeah.
But it is just it happened really quickly.
Because the equation flipped on its head in terms of the house and land package versus buying established stock with that price movement.
Yes.
So how's the land transactions rebounded out in the growth?
Yeah, and exactly right. Like at one stage, we were selling houses for cheaper than you could build them for. So then why were people building? And if people aren't building, then that's going to only add to the supply problem that we already have kind of in Geelong.
That's started to balance out now?
It has started to balance out. So people now can kind of say, well, I want to build because I want the depreciation, or because I want that particular location, or because I want everything brand new and I want these new colours. And as Armstrong Creek is ageing, so are the houses. So now there is a bit of difference between the brands that were 10 years ago and now, the more muted tones that are happening.
Do you remember
as well.
back in the day, like when you were first getting going, I was getting going, there was the blocks of land at Armstrong Creek were pricing at $270,000 a lot. That was the 600 square metre lots. Like they were the big ones, right? And now they're averaging, $480,000, $500,000. What's been good to see is those blocks that were selling it in 2022, they were transacting at $550,000 and $520,000, and now they're back at $480,000, $470,000. But the developers have adjusted and they've pulled the prices back, and they're actually recognised that the market's not there anymore. And I think it took them a while to adjust, didn't it? And so now you're starting to see house and land packages being competitive again. But there was a period there where the developers, I think, had their head in the sand. And they were still thinking they were going to get $550,000 for these lots.
Yeah, it was a bit of a perfect storm, I think, because a lot of the developers in Armstrong Creek were at a point where it was just the cream for them. So they didn't have the debt. They'd kind of done enough pre-sales that they didn't need to adjust their price. So why would you? So they didn't need to develop that next stage in a hurry because there wasn't investors waiting for. So they were almost going, well, we'll wait for the market to bounce back and then we'll develop the land, which is again added to this supply problem that we've got across Geelong. Where the northern growth corridor is just stagnant, so we don't have that supply there. So it's actually putting more pressure on Armstrong Creek. So whilst there's this supply and demand, it's just ever evolving because it's not getting any better.
And there is another thing developing that's going to impact Armstrong Creek in a good way, in that the government's putting out these DCP values for each new estate. And so, for example, Bellpost Hill, where Creamery Road, the DCP came in there originally. It's been adjusted originally around 1.3 per hectare, right? But the average DCP in Armstrong Creek is only around 330 a hectare. So if you're a developer, you can develop a lot cheaper in Armstrong Creek than you can develop the same block in Creamery Road or any of the new estates. So any new estate that requires the development contribution credit to be calculated, that hasn't already got that in stone and signed off by the government, you're going to now expect to get a whole lot of other things thrown into that. So any new estate coming up or opening up isn't going to be able to compete with what's already there on the market in Armstrong Creek. And those, even if they're not developed yet, they're inside those precincts that have already got the DCP signed off, like your Horseshoe Bend Road precinct and others. So it's going to mean that you can still develop cheaper in Armstrong Creek.
Yeah, and the problem is there's just not probably enough left to go, and then the developers...
How much left to go?
There's probably about a third still to go of approved areas.
So was it 20,000 houses originally?
Yeah, 22,000.
So what are we, 15,000 people out there?
Around there,
It's pretty cool to see that grow, isn't it? It's like, the size of a
Suburb
whole town,
just bolted on.
Colac just bolted on over the last few years. We've watched it grow. What about the new infrastructure that's going in, the Commonwealth Games money, about the basketball courts, but also the swimming centre and things like that? How have you seen that? How does it feel as a resident down there seeing it all happen?
The Glasgow Games?
Glasgow Games.
I think we've, and selling in Armstrong Creek for now over 10 years, any piece of new infrastructure adds to the story of why someone wants to buy in that area. So it adds to the demand, and then it adds to the value, because as you have more people wanting to buy a property, it's pretty logic that then the price will go up from there. So any new infrastructure is great. And I remember the first shopping centre that was built, so the Woolworths getting built was a game changer. Just having groceries in the area was a game changer.
Yeah, the amenity, that brings people.
So now having a pool and basketball courts and, I guess for the region, some of the best infrastructure, it's obviously only just going to drive demand, which then drives house prices more. And it's still that's a bit of a worry that we're just kind of wanting to see how it plays out.
Do you feel the community growing? Is it starting to feel like you're getting community spirit around the place?
Absolutely, And things like schools bring communities together. And then you've got the kindergartens now. There was just another one that's opened up the other day. Heaps of childcare centres. And I know recently from my experience, but the parents group in Armstrong Creek, there's 30, 40 participants in that kind of stage, whereas some of the other areas along the Ballerine might have 10 to 15.
We've got a very competitive under-9s football team.
Is it the Sharks? We sponsor the Sharks. Shout out to the Sharks. I think it is. It's people, and now there's more generations living in Armstrong Creek. So it was just, okay, we'll move to Armstrong Creek because that's where we can afford to potentially buy, or we want to buy because of the connectivity to other areas. But it's now, great, now both my kids live in Armstrong Creek. I want to live there too. So then we've got parents relocating from Melbourne or from Bendigo, Ballarat to be in the
we're
area.
close,
So then
yep.
you kind of are building out more of a community that's not just there potentially for affordability. It's because there's now infrastructure, there's now good schools. Like Iona College is, you know,
it's
really
got a
well
great
known.
name.
Yeah,
There's
really good name. And
people lining up to get in there now,
Yeah.
and they're running buses from bloody Geelong West and Northern Geelong to get down there. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's a really good school.
Yeah.
And the schools help, don't they? Like, they really create, if you get really good schools in the region, you know, it really does drive people to come closer, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How did you get involved in real estate? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, you've got a legal background. You might be the most qualified real estate agent in Geelong.
Yeah, so I was at uni doing law and accounting. So when I was at uni, my parents said to me, I was living on res at the time, and they said, hey, look, we're thinking we want to buy an investment property in Geelong. They've been in the same property on a farm in Shepparton for 36 years. Not much, I guess, property knowledge. So sent me on my way as a 21-year-old to go and look at some houses. So I've kind of found the interest in property from doing that. So we'd spend some time going around Grovedale, Warm Ponds with a $350,000 budget, which was a pretty okay budget at that point, trying to find a property for me to be able to say to mum and dad, hey, I think this is going to be good. I think my level of experience was slightly higher than theirs, but still very, very inexperienced of what I was even doing. So from that, I then stumbled across Armstrong Creek and was like, oh, wow, you could actually build a whole brand new house for this. I don't need this house straight away. How about we go down this process? And from that, when we were signing up for a house and land package, the person there needed an assistant. So I started as an assistant in a display home. And then from there, we kind of thought, why not start a real estate agency? We're selling to all these investors. And, you know, to be perfectly honest, we started it and I had no idea what we were doing because I obviously haven't filled out an authority before, didn't know what licenses you needed, anything
You were
like
the
that.
first agency, weren't you, in Armstrong Creek?
Yeah. Well, there was nowhere to be, so we were operating out of my back living space once the house was built.
So that was your house near the corner.
Yeah,
we used to come pick up the keys from.
Yes,
Right.
Yeah. So it was I guess a humble beginning to a certain degree, and where we started. But that's what the area. And since then, we've just been growing with the area. So one of our key metrics that we always are looking at is market share, because as the area grows, we want to grow with that area as well. And we're still, you know, super embedded in the area, super passionate about it, and that's why I love talking about it all the time, because I think it's still got so much.
I love
when
someo's got a passion for something, Mike. It just comes out. You know, and it's great to see. I think you know, it's funny how our region develops. You know, certain agents that sort of, you know, cover certain areas and do have that market share in those particular areas and that skill set, and it develops, you know, like a specialty, if you like, a specialty agency that really does know the area and can provide those services. And you talk about Torquay, your Hayden's down in Torquay, and yourself in Armstrong Creek, and Mike obviously in Geelong. So, you know, you do get these agents that have developed these special areas where you focus, and you were well known for it. So congratulations.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I think our philosophy is there's enough for everyone. So we're always welcoming competition, and you know, I think when people have choice, it just means that when you do get chosen, then it, you know, is a little bit extra than just being the only option as well.
Absolutely.
So as we've kind of welcomed competition into the area, it's been nice to be able to be challenged to, you know, one up our process, one up our service. If you're just kind of sitting there, I think you'd become quite complacent. So I think we're always trying to push to be better than what we are today.
Perfect.
Well, thanks for coming on Propped, and congratulations on the brands that you've built. All your brands have, you know, great reputation in the area. So congratulations on what you built, and coming on Propped and educating a value on a commercial agent. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, and that brings a close of another episode. So we'd like to thank our guest, David Flood.
Always good. Always knows
good
stuff.
Still hasn't given us that lunch.
Yeah, still owes us dinner.
Is it lunch or dinner?
I think we're going to upgrade to dinner.
And really insightful chat from Megan Rovers. So we really appreciate it.
How smart is she?
Too smart.
Too smart for us.
Made us look stupid, didn't she? So thanks very much, Megan, coming in and providing a lot of insight for Armstrong Creek. Again,
get that insight into that local area like that, deep dive into that little spot.
Yeah, and it's had a fair bit of twists and turns over the last couple of years. So, you know, look forward to seeing what's happening in that space in the near future. Again, if you want to hear from us, don't forget to subscribe. Otherwise, our usual thanks, Giggles, Fitzy behind there. You can, the man that keep hearing laughing right on cue, Fitzy. And Chris behind the camera. As always, thanks for joining in, and we'll see you next month with another episode of Prop by the Bar.
Thanks for watching.